They called me uncreative, a middle-aged woman with calloused hands and a quiet voice standing behind a folding table at Westfield Shopping Center, and they said I had no artistic vision. But when those corporate executives walked through that mall entrance 3 days before Christmas, carrying clipboards and wearing expressions like they owned the place, what happened next made that assistant manager wish he'd never questioned a woman who'd spent 15 years perfecting an art form he couldn't even pronounce. If you believe that expertise comes in unexpected packages, you need to hear this story, because what you're about to discover will change how you see the people working quietly around you every single day. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Rebecca Foster, and 3 weeks ago I was just another seasonal employee at Westfield Shopping Center's gift wrapping station. You know the type of place I'm talking about. A small booth squeezed between the pretzel stand and the phone repair kiosk, decorated with red and green streamers that had seen better Christmases. The kind of temporary setup where harried shoppers dump their purchases and expect miracles in under 5 minutes while checking their phones and tapping their feet impatiently. I'd been working there for exactly 11 days when Marcus Webb decided I wasn't creative enough for his standards. Marcus was the assistant manager of retail operations, a 28-year-old business school graduate who wore his lanyard like a badge of honor and treated seasonal workers like we were barely worth the minimum wage they paid us. He had perfectly styled hair, shoes that cost more than I made in a week, and the kind of confidence that comes from never having your competence questioned by someone half your age. The gift wrapping station was supposed to be a simple operation. Customers brought their purchases, we wrapped them in festive paper, added bows and ribbons, collected $15 per package, and sent them on their way. Most of the other seasonal workers approached it like an assembly line, cranking out packages that looked decent enough from a distance, but fell apart the moment someone handled them with anything less than extreme care. Crooked corners, uneven folds, tape showing through the paper, bows that came loose before customers made it to their cars. I approached it differently. When Mrs. Chen brought me her daughter's jewelry box, I didn't just wrap it in whatever paper was closest. I studied the shape, considered the recipient, and chose paper with a subtle pattern that complemented the box's elegant lines. I measured precisely, folded with mathematical accuracy, and created corners so sharp you could cut yourself on them. The bow I crafted wasn't just decorative. It was positioned to balance the package's visual weight and secured with techniques that would keep it pristine through multiple handlings. Marcus first noticed my work on a Tuesday morning during the pre-Christmas rush. I was wrapping a set of crystal wine glasses for an elderly man who explained they were for his wife's 70th birthday. The glasses came in an awkward rectangular box that most people would have covered in paper like they were wrapping a book. Instead, I analyzed the proportions, selected complementary papers in ivory and gold, and created a presentation that transformed an ordinary purchase into something that looked like it belonged under the Christmas tree at the White House. The technique I used was called furoshiki-inspired geometric wrapping, a method that combines traditional Japanese fabric folding principles with Western gift presentation aesthetics. The paper didn't just cover the box. It enhanced its natural geometry while creating visual interest through carefully calculated color placement and fold patterns. The ribbon work incorporated elements of French bouquet construction, with loops positioned according to the golden ratio to create maximum visual appeal while maintaining structural integrity. Marcus walked over just as I was adding the final touches, a cascade of silk ribbon arranged in a pattern that would have made Versailles garden designers weep with envy. The elderly customer was staring at his package like I'd just handed him the crown jewels. "How much extra for this level of work?" he asked, reaching for his wallet. "No extra charge," I replied, handing him the package. "Your wife deserves something beautiful." He left shaking his head in amazement, but Marcus wasn't impressed. He waited until the customer was out of earshot before approaching my station with the expression of someone who'd caught an employee stealing office supplies. "Rebecca, we need to talk," he said, clipboard already in hand. "I've been watching your technique, and frankly, you're overthinking this whole process." I looked up from the children's book I was preparing for wrapping, a first edition of Where the Wild Things Are, that clearly meant everything to the young mother who'd purchased it. She'd mentioned it was the same book her father used to read to her before he passed away, and she wanted it wrapped for her 3-year-old son's first Christmas that would include stories about Grandpa in heaven. "I'm sorry, I don't understand," I said carefully. Marcus gestured at the workstation where I had laid out different paper options and ribbon selections. "This isn't an art class. We're running a business here. Customers want their packages wrapped quickly and efficiently. They don't need all this elaborate decoration nonsense." The word nonsense hit me like a slap. 15 years of studying presentation arts, of perfecting techniques that most people didn't even know existed, reduced to nonsense by someone who probably couldn't wrap a perfect cube if his promotion depended on it. "I understand we need to be efficient," I said, keeping my voice level, "but I don't think taking pride in quality work is necessarily a bad thing." Marcus flipped through pages on his clipboard like he was consulting some official manual of acceptable wrapping techniques. "Rebecca, let me be direct with you. You're spending too much time on each package. The other workers can wrap 3 packages in the time it takes you to do 1. We're here to provide a service, not to create museum pieces." No creativity, no artistic vision. The words echoed in my head as Marcus continued his lecture about appropriate expectations for seasonal retail workers. He had no idea that the woman he was patronizing had spent 2 years studying under Monsieur Laurent Dubois at the École Supérieure des Arts Décoratifs in Paris, learning the intricacies of luxury gift presentation for clients whose names appeared on Forbes lists and whose holiday parties were covered by Architectural Digest. He didn't know that I'd been the head gift presentation specialist for Harrods in London during their centennial celebration, personally responsible for wrapping presents for members of the British royal family. He couldn't imagine that the quiet woman with the department store name tag had created presentation designs for Tiffany & Co.'s flagship store during Fashion Week, or that my work had been featured in exhibitions at the Museum of Arts and Design in New York. Marcus saw a middle-aged seasonal worker who was taking too long with scissors and ribbon. He didn't see Rebecca Foster, whose innovative fusion of Eastern and Western presentation techniques had earned recognition from the International Gift Presentation Arts Council, or the woman who'd been commissioned to create custom wrapping designs for diplomatic gift exchanges between heads of state. "I think we need to simplify your approach," Marcus concluded, pulling out a laminated instructions sheet that looked like it had been designed for kindergartners. "Here is our standard wrapping procedure. 6 steps, 3 pieces of tape, basic bow placement. Should take no more than 90 seconds per package for standard rectangular items." I stared at the instruction sheet, which showed stick figure diagrams of the most elementary wrapping technique imaginable. Fold paper, a round box, tape edges, stick bow on top. It was like being handed a crayon drawing after spending years studying Renaissance masterpieces. "This is what corporate wants to see," Marcus explained, apparently mistaking my stunned silence for confusion. "Clean, consistent, efficient. Save the artistic expression for your own time." The irony would have been funny if it weren't so insulting. Marcus was lecturing me about corporate standards while being completely oblivious to the fact that I'd literally helped establish corporate presentation standards for some of the most prestigious retail establishments in 3 different countries. My techniques were taught in professional development courses for luxury retail employees. My methods were referenced in industry publications that Marcus had probably never heard of. But how could I explain any of that without sounding like I was making up credentials to impress someone whose opinion shouldn't have mattered? How do you tell someone that you're actually overqualified for a position when they've already decided you're barely qualified at all? I understand, I said finally, taking the instruction sheet because refusing it would have caused more problems than it solved. Great, Marcus said, his tone suggesting he believed he'd solved a significant personnel issue. I know change can be difficult, but I think you'll find this approach much more manageable. Less stressful for you, better experience for our customers. Less stressful, as if reducing my work to paint-by-numbers simplicity would somehow improve my life rather than slowly killing my soul with each poorly folded corner and carelessly positioned bow. After Marcus walked away, I stood at my station holding the laminated instruction sheet and trying to process what had just happened. Around me, the mall buzzed with pre-Christmas energy. Families rushed past with shopping bags and strollers, teenagers gathered around the food court, and elderly couples moved slowly through crowds of harried gift buyers. Everyone was focused on their own holiday preparations, completely unaware that someone's professional identity had just been casually dismantled at the gift-wrapping station. I thought about calling in sick the next day. I thought about quitting outright and finding some other way to earn the extra money I needed for Christmas expenses. I thought about explaining to Marcus exactly who he was dealing with, credentials and all, just to see the expression on his face when he realized he'd been lecturing one of the most qualified gift presentation specialists on the East Coast about basic wrapping techniques. But I didn't do any of those things. Instead, I folded the instruction sheet and put it in my apron pocket, next to my scissors and measuring tape. I smiled at the next customer who approached my station, a tired-looking father carrying a doll that was clearly destined to be the highlight of some little girl's Christmas morning. "How would you like this wrapped?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer Marcus expected. "However you think is best," the father replied. "My daughter is 6, and she's been asking Santa for this doll since October. I want it to look special when she finds it under the tree." I looked at the doll, then at the father's hopeful expression, then at the instruction sheet in my pocket that would turn his daughter's special present into something that looked like it had been wrapped by a machine in a packaging factory. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I pulled out ivory paper with tiny silver stars, ribbon in 3 coordinating shades of blue, and began creating something that would make a 6-year-old believe in magic when she saw it Christmas morning. Not because Marcus thought it was appropriate, but because some things are more important than efficiency metrics and corporate guidelines. What I didn't know was that 200 yards away, in the mall's administrative offices, someone had been making phone calls about Westfield's holiday presentation standards. Someone who'd heard that this year's gift wrapping station was producing work that was, according to preliminary reports, either remarkably exceptional or completely unacceptable, depending on who you asked. Someone who'd be visiting our little booth in exactly 3 days to see for himself what was really happening at station number 7. Someone whose opinion would matter a lot more than Marcus Webb's. That was Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, word somehow reached the district office that there were concerns about consistency and efficiency at Westfield's gift wrapping operation. By Thursday, Marcus was making pointed comments about team players and following established procedures every time he walked past my station. But I kept wrapping presents the way they deserved to be wrapped, for the grandmother who wanted her grandson's first Christmas ornament to look perfect, for the teenager who'd saved 3 months of allowance to buy his girlfriend something special, for the single mother who worked 2 jobs and wanted her son's gift to look like it came from somewhere more expensive than the discount store where she'd actually bought it. Each package was a small act of rebellion against Marcus's instruction sheet. Each perfectly folded corner was a quiet protest against the idea that seasonal workers shouldn't take pride in their craftsmanship. Each carefully positioned bow was a reminder that expertise doesn't disappear just because someone with a clipboard doesn't recognize it. I had no idea that my small rebellion was about to become very public, and that the man reviewing security footage of our gift wrapping station had credentials that would make Marcus Webb's business degree look like a participation trophy. All I knew was that Friday morning felt different when I arrived at work. There was tension in the air that had nothing to do with last-minute Christmas shoppers and everything to do with the way Marcus kept checking his phone and adjusting his tie, like he was expecting important visitors. Important visitors who, as it turned out, were already on their way. Friday mornings started like every other day that week, except for the way Marcus kept pacing between the administrative offices and our gift wrapping station. He'd check his watch, adjust his tie, scroll through his phone, then repeat the entire sequence 5 minutes later. Something was making him nervous, and whatever it was had started early because he'd arrived at the mall 45 minutes before his usual time. I was working on a particularly challenging project when I first noticed the unusual activity. A customer had brought me a collection of handmade pottery pieces, each one irregularly shaped and incredibly fragile. Her daughter was a ceramic artist whose work was being displayed in a gallery for the first time, and she wanted each piece wrapped individually for Christmas gifts to family members. The pottery wasn't just gifts, it represented a daughter's artistic breakthrough and a mother's pride in watching her child succeed. Most people would have wrapped each piece in tissue paper, stuck them in boxes, and called it a day. But irregular shapes require specialized techniques to ensure both protection and presentation. I was using a combination of Japanese futoshiki principles and museum-quality padding methods, creating custom-fitted wrapping that would showcase each piece's unique form while providing maximum protection during transport. The first piece was a small vase with an asymmetrical neck that curved like a swan's. I selected cream-colored paper with a subtle textured finish that would complement the pottery's natural glaze, then began the careful process of creating folds that followed the vase's organic lines. The wrapping needed to highlight the piece's artistic merit while ensuring it wouldn't shift or crack if someone handled the package roughly. That's when I saw them. 3 people in dark coats walking through the mall with the purposeful stride of individuals who weren't there to shop. They moved like inspectors, pausing to observe operations and taking notes on devices that looked more sophisticated than anything Marcus carried on his clipboard. The woman leading the group had steel-gray hair pulled back in a precise bun and wore glasses that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Behind her walked 2 men in expensive suits, one carrying what appeared to be a tablet computer and the other holding a leather portfolio that suggested serious business. Marcus spotted them before I did. I watched his face change from nervous anticipation to outright panic as the group approached our section of the mall. He smoothed his tie for the 3rd time in 10 minutes, straightened his shoulders, and adopted the expression of someone trying very hard to look competent and in control. The gray-haired woman reached our gift wrapping station first, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of the operation. She studied Jennifer's station where a package sat half-wrapped while Jennifer texted someone about weekend plans. She observed Ashley's work area, noting the scattered scraps of paper and the roll of tape that had somehow unraveled across half the table. Then her gaze landed on my station, where the pottery vase sat partially wrapped in what was clearly a more sophisticated technique than anything else visible in the immediate area. "Good morning," Marcus said, stepping forward with his best customer service smile. "I'm Marcus Webb, Assistant Manager of Retail Operations. Are you here about the gift wrapping services?" The woman didn't immediately respond. Instead, she moved closer to my station and studied the half-wrapped vase with the intensity of someone who understood exactly what they were looking at. She examined the paper selection, the fold patterns, the way I'd positioned padding to protect vulnerable areas while maintaining the piece's visual impact. "This is interesting work," she said finally, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to having her observations taken seriously. "What technique is being used here?" I looked up from the vase, suddenly aware that this wasn't a casual question from a curious customer. The woman's body language, the way she'd phrased the question, the sophisticated terminology she'd used all suggested someone with professional knowledge of presentation arts. "It's a modified futoshiki approach adapted for fragile, irregular forms," I replied carefully. "The padding placement follows museum conservation principles to prevent pressure points, while the fold pattern enhances the piece's natural geometry." The gray-haired woman's eyebrows rose slightly. Behind her, one of the men made a note on his tablet, while the other opened his leather portfolio and consulted what appeared to be detailed documentation. Marcus stepped closer, clearly uncomfortable with the direction this conversation was taking. Our gift wrapping services follow established corporate guidelines to ensure consistency and efficiency across all locations. He was speaking in the careful tone of someone reciting memorized talking points while standing on increasingly thin ice. The gray-haired woman turned back to my station, where I was continuing to work on the vase, because stopping mid-process would have been worse than finishing under scrutiny. "How long have you been using these advanced techniques?" she asked me directly. I hesitated, acutely aware that Marcus was listening to every word and probably calculating how much trouble I was about to cause for his carefully managed operation. "I've been studying presentation arts for about 15 years. "Studying where?" This was the moment I'd been dreading since Marcus first handed me that instruction sheet, the moment when my actual background would either be dismissed as irrelevant bragging or recognized as something that changed the entire dynamic of the situation. "I trained at the École Supérieure des Arts Décoratifs in Paris under Monsieur Laurent Dubois. I've worked with Harrods, Tiffany & Co., and several diplomatic protocol offices." The silence that followed my words was so complete I could hear the mall's background music playing 3 stores away. Marcus's face went through several color changes before settling on a pale green that suggested he began to understand exactly how badly he had misjudged the situation. The gray-haired woman extended her hand. "Doctor?"
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Margaret Whitfield, Director of Standards and Protocol for the International Luxury Retail Consortium. These are my colleagues, James Morrison from the State Department's Protocol Office and David Chen from the Federal Trade Commission's Consumer Experience Division. I shook her hand, trying to process what was happening. The International Luxury Retail Consortium was the organization that established presentation standards for high-end retail operations worldwide. The State Department's Protocol Office handled diplomatic gift exchanges and official presentations for government functions. The Federal Trade Commission's Consumer Experience Division monitored retail practices to ensure customers received services that matched advertised standards. These weren't mall inspectors conducting routine evaluations. These were the people who defined what exceptional gift presentation looked like at the highest levels of professional practice. "We're here because Westfield Corporate received some interesting reports about this location's gift wrapping services," Dr. Whitfield continued. "According to preliminary observations, there seemed to be significant variations in quality and technique that warranted further investigation." Marcus made a sound that might have been an attempt at laughter. "I can explain any inconsistencies you might have observed. We've had some challenges with seasonal employees understanding appropriate skill levels for this type of work, but I've been working to implement standardized procedures that ensure consistent results." Dr. Whitfield's expression suggested she'd heard similar explanations before and found them less than convincing. "Mr. Webb, could you show me an example of these standardized procedures?" Marcus practically lunged toward Jennifer's station, clearly eager to demonstrate the efficiency-focused approach he'd been championing all week. Jennifer looked up from her phone long enough to realize she was suddenly the center of attention, then hastily attempted to finish wrapping a small electronics box that she'd apparently started 15 minutes earlier. The result was exactly what anyone familiar with quality presentation work would expect. Crooked corners where the paper didn't quite meet properly, visible tape along edges that should have been seamlessly folded, a bow that had been stuck to the package like an afterthought rather than integrated into the overall design. It looked like something a distracted teenager had wrapped while thinking about other things, which was essentially what it was. "This represents our standard approach," Marcus announced with forced confidence. "Quick, efficient, meets basic customer expectations for holiday gift presentation." James Morrison from the State Department stepped forward and examined Jennifer's work with the careful attention of someone accustomed to evaluating presentation quality for diplomatic functions. He didn't say anything, but his expression suggested he was filing away observations that would appear in some kind of official report. David Chen from the FTC was taking photographs of various packages around the station, documenting the range of quality that customers could expect to receive depending on which employee happened to be working when they arrived. The contrast between stations was becoming more obvious with each picture he took. "Miss Foster," Dr. Whitfield said, turning back to me, "could you explain the difference between what you were just demonstrating with that pottery piece and what we're seeing at the other stations?" This was dangerous territory. Answering honestly would essentially be criticizing my coworkers and supervisor in front of federal officials and industry executives. But providing a diplomatic non-answer would be dishonest to people who clearly understood the technical aspects of what they were observing. "Different approaches serve different purposes," I said carefully. "The technique I was using prioritizes protection and aesthetic enhancement for items with special significance or unusual requirements. Standard commercial wrapping focuses on speed and cost efficiency for routine packages. And in your professional opinion, which approach better serves customer interests?" Marcus was staring at me with an expression that clearly communicated the consequences I could expect if I said anything that undermined his management decisions. But Dr. Whitfield was asking for my professional opinion, and after 15 years of developing expertise in this field, I had one. "It depends on what the customer values," I said carefully. "If someone wants their gift presentation to reflect the thought and care that went into selecting the gift itself, then techniques that enhance the recipient's experience are worth the additional time investment. If someone just needs their purchase covered in paper, then faster methods are perfectly adequate." Dr. Whitfield nodded thoughtfully. "Mr. Morrison, you handle diplomatic gift presentations. How do these different approaches align with federal protocol requirements?" James Morrison consulted his portfolio before responding. "Federal protocol requires that official gifts reflect the dignity and respect appropriate to the parties' relationship. Presentation quality is considered an integral component of diplomatic communication. Substandard wrapping would be interpreted as disrespectful to recipients and damaging to international relationships." The implications of his statement hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was just beginning to spread. If Westfield was advertising professional gift wrapping services, but delivering inconsistent quality that wouldn't meet federal standards for important presentations, there were regulatory issues that went beyond Marcus's employee management concerns. "Mr. Chen, what does the FTC consider acceptable variation in advertised services?" David Chen looked up from his tablet where he'd been documenting our conversation. "The Federal Trade Commission requires that advertised services match actual delivery within reasonable parameters. If a business advertises professional gift wrapping, customers have the right to expect professional quality results. Significant quality variations could constitute false advertising if the substandard work falls below industry norms for professional services." Marcus was beginning to look like someone who'd walked into what he thought was a friendly conversation and discovered he was actually facing a regulatory audit. "I think there might be some misunderstanding about our service level," he said quickly. "We advertise gift wrapping services, not necessarily professional-level presentation work." "Actually," Dr. Whitfield said, pulling out her own tablet and scrolling through what appeared to be Westfield's marketing materials, "your corporate website specifically mentions expert gift presentation services and professional holiday wrapping by trained specialists. Those terms have specific meanings within the retail industry." The blood drained from Marcus's face as he realized his attempts to manage me had created a situation where Westfield's actual service delivery was being compared to their marketing promises by people with the authority to determine whether those promises constituted false advertising. "Furthermore," James Morrison added, We've received requests from several diplomatic offices asking about the availability of professional quality gift presentation services in this region. This location was specifically recommended based on reports of exceptional work quality. I felt like I was watching a movie where the plot had suddenly shifted from workplace drama to international incident. Diplomatic offices were making inquiries about our little gift wrapping station because someone had noticed that the quality of work here was significantly different from standard mall services. "Who made those recommendations?" Dr. Whitfield asked. Morrison consulted his portfolio again. The initial report came from Lady Catherine Pemberton, the British cultural attaché who had some gift wrapped here last week. She was so impressed with the quality that she contacted our office to inquire about using this location for diplomatic gift preparations during the upcoming New Year reception season. I remembered Lady Pemberton. She'd brought me a collection of first edition books to be wrapped for colleagues back in London, and she'd been very specific about wanting presentation quality that would reflect well on her office. I'd used techniques that incorporated elements of traditional British presentation styles while meeting modern diplomatic standards for international gift exchanges. What I hadn't realized was that she'd been so pleased with the results that she'd recommended our services to other diplomatic offices, which had led to inquiries at the State Department level, which had ultimately resulted in this official visit to evaluate whether Westfield's gift wrapping operation could handle sensitive diplomatic presentations. "The problem," Dr. Whitfield continued, "is that our preliminary assessment suggests significant inconsistency in service quality that would make this location unsuitable for diplomatic use. We need to determine whether that inconsistency represents training issues that can be addressed or fundamental limitations that would require alternative arrangements." Marcus was now visibly sweating despite the mall's air conditioning. "I'm sure we can address any training needs," he said desperately. "We have protocols in place to ensure consistent service delivery across all positions." "Mr. Webb," David Chen interjected, "could you demonstrate these protocols by wrapping a package yourself?" It was the question Marcus had been dreading since the moment these officials arrived. He'd spent the week criticizing everyone else's techniques and insisting that his standardized procedures were superior, but now he was being asked to prove his competence in front of people who actually understood what professional gift presentation looked like. "Of course," Marcus said, trying to project confidence he clearly didn't feel. "I'd be happy to show you our standard approach." He selected a medium-sized box from our practice inventory and approached my station, presumably because it had the best selection of materials available. But as he reached for the paper, I realized he was about to attempt advanced techniques he'd never learned, using tools he didn't understand in front of experts who would immediately recognize his limitations. This was going to be a disaster, and there was nothing I could do to prevent it without making the situation even worse for everyone involved. Marcus had built his authority on the premise that gift wrapping was simple work that didn't require special expertise. In about 30 seconds, he was going to discover exactly how wrong he'd been about that assumption. And Dr. Whitfield, James Morrison, and David Chen were going to witness every embarrassing moment of his education. The box Marcus had selected was a jewelry box with an unusual octagonal shape that required careful paper measurement and specialized folding techniques to achieve clean results. He approached it like he was wrapping a standard rectangular package, which meant his first cut of paper was approximately 4 inches too short in one direction and 6 inches too long in the other. Dr. Whitfield watched with the detached interest of a scientist observing a predictable experimental outcome. Morrison took notes while Chen continued his photographic documentation of the proceedings. They weren't being cruel, they were simply recording evidence for whatever report would result from this investigation. Marcus struggled with the paper for several minutes, trying to make insufficient material cover a shape it was never intended to fit. The results were exactly what anyone with professional training would expect: Wrinkled corners, visible gaps where the paper didn't meet, and tape applied in increasingly desperate attempts to hold everything together. The bow he attempted to attach fell off twice before he managed to attach it with enough tape to ensure it would stay in place until someone handled the package roughly enough to dislodge it entirely. "This demonstrates our efficient approach to challenging shapes," Marcus announced, presenting the finished package with as much dignity as he could muster. The package looked like it had been wrapped by someone who learned the process by watching instructional videos while intoxicated. Every technical error that professional training was designed to prevent was visible in Marcus's work, and the contrast with the pottery vase I'd been wrapping became even starker when placed side by side. "I see," Dr. Whitfield said, diplomatically. "Miss Foster, could you show us how you would approach the same task?" I took a second octagonal box from our inventory, identical to the one Marcus had just mangled, and began the process of creating a presentation that would meet the standards these officials represented. Octagonal shapes require careful geometric analysis to determine optimal paper dimensions and fold sequences that accommodate the irregular angles while maintaining visual balance. I selected paper that complemented the box's proportions, measured according to the mathematical relations that govern efficient material use for complex geometries, and began the careful process of creating folds that enhanced rather than fought against the shape's natural characteristics. The difference in technique was immediately obvious to anyone familiar with professional presentation work. Where Marcus had struggled against the box's unusual shape, I worked with it to create clean lines and elegant proportions. Where his wrapping looked improvised and chaotic, mine followed established principles that had been developed and refined over decades of professional practice. When I finished, the octagonal box looked like it had been designed to be wrapped exactly the way I'd presented it. The paper followed the geometric lines naturally, the corners were sharp and precise, and the ribbon work incorporated the octagonal theme into a bow design that complemented rather than competed with the overall presentation. "Remarkable," James Morrison said, examining both packages side by side. "The technical proficiency difference is quite significant."
David Chen was taking photographs of both wrapped boxes from multiple angles, presumably for inclusion in whatever regulatory documentation would result from this evaluation. The visual evidence of the quality variation was now thoroughly documented for official review. Dr. Whitfield set down both packages and turned to address Marcus directly. "Mr. Webb, based on what we've observed today, it appears that your standardized procedures may not be adequate for the service level your corporate website advertises. Furthermore, the employee you've been attempting to restrict appears to be the only person at this location capable of delivering the professional quality work that diplomatic offices and high-end customers have come to expect." Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but Dr. Whitfield wasn't finished. More concerning from a regulatory perspective is the apparent disconnect between management's understanding of professional presentation standards and the actual expertise available at this location. Ms. Foster clearly possesses advanced training and experience that could elevate this operation to truly professional status, but she's been discouraged from utilizing those skills in favor of simplified procedures that don't meet federal requirements for diplomatic use. The implications of her statement were becoming clear to everyone present. Marcus's efforts to standardize and simplify our gift wrapping operation had inadvertently created a situation where Westfield was failing to deliver the professional services they had advertised, potentially violating federal truth in advertising regulations while simultaneously wasting the expertise of the one employee capable of meeting international standards. "Dr. Whitfield," I said carefully, "I want to clarify that Mr. Webb was following corporate guidelines as he understood them. The quality variations you've observed aren't necessarily the result of poor management so much as a lack of awareness about the technical requirements for professional-level presentation work." I was trying to provide Marcus with a face-saving explanation that wouldn't make him look deliberately incompetent in front of federal officials. But Dr. Whitfield's response suggested that corporate accountability issues went far beyond individual management decisions. Ms. Foster, your diplomacy is commendable, but the regulatory concerns here extend beyond local management practices. If Westfield Corporate is advertising professional gift presentation services without ensuring that their operations can actually deliver professional quality work, that represents a systemic problem that requires systematic solutions. She turned back to Marcus, who was looking like someone who'd just realized he was standing in the middle of a minefield. Mr. Webb, we're going to need to speak with your district manager about implementing changes that will bring this location's actual service delivery into alignment with corporate advertising claims. In the meantime, I think it would be appropriate to discuss Ms. Foster's role in developing those improvements. What happened next changed everything I thought I knew about corporate hierarchies, professional recognition, and the difference between management authority and actual expertise. Dr. Whitfield reached into her briefcase and pulled out a folder that looked like it contained official documentation of some kind. Ms. Foster, before we proceed with recommendations for operational improvements, I think it's important that everyone understand exactly who we're dealing with here. She opened the folder and consulted what appeared to be a detailed professional dossier. Rebecca Foster, École Supérieure des Arts Décoratifs, graduated summa cum laude with specialized certification in luxury retail presentation arts. Apprenticeship with Laurent Dubois, who is recognized as one of the foremost experts in international gift presentation protocols. Professional experience includes leadership positions at Harrods, Tiffany & Co., and consultation work for diplomatic protocol offices in 3 countries. Marcus was staring at the folder like it contained secrets from another planet. Furthermore, Dr. Whitfield continued, Ms. Foster holds advanced certifications from the International Gift Presentation Arts Council, has published articles in professional trade journals, and has been recognized by the World Retail Excellence Organization for innovative fusion techniques that have become standard practice in luxury retail operations across Europe and North America. She closed the folder and looked directly at Marcus. Mr. Webb, the woman you've been treating as an entry-level seasonal employee is actually one of the most qualified gift presentation specialists on the East Coast. Her expertise level is equivalent to what major luxury retailers typically reserve for their most prestigious flagship locations. The silence that followed was so profound I could hear my own heartbeat. Marcus's face had gone through several more color changes and settled on a shade that suggested he was beginning to understand exactly how catastrophically he'd misjudged the situation. The question now, Dr. Whitfield said, is how Westfield intends to utilize this remarkable resource to improve their service delivery and meet the professional standards their marketing materials promise to customers. That's when James Morrison stepped forward with news that would transform everything about how this gift wrapping station operated and who would be making decisions about operational procedures going forward. James Morrison opened his leather portfolio and extracted a document that bore the official seal of the United States Department of State. The paper was heavy, cream-colored stock that immediately conveyed the gravity of whatever was written on it. And when he unfolded it, I could see multiple signatures and official stamps that suggested this wasn't just routine paperwork. Ms. Foster, Morrison said, his voice carrying the formal tone reserved for significant announcements. After reviewing your credentials and observing your work today, I'm authorized to extend an official invitation on behalf of the State Department's Protocol Office. Marcus had gone completely still, like someone who just realized they were watching a movie where they'd fundamentally misunderstood the plot from the very beginning. The State Department requires specialized gift presentation services for diplomatic functions throughout the upcoming year. Based on your demonstrated expertise and Lady Pemberton's enthusiastic recommendation, we would like to offer you the position of Regional Gift Protocol Consultant for all official State Department functions in the Mid-Atlantic region. I stared at the document he was holding, trying to process what I was hearing. The State Department's Protocol Office handled gift presentations for visiting heads of state, diplomatic receptions, and official ceremonies that appeared on international news broadcasts. The position he was describing would make me responsible for ensuring that American diplomatic gifts met the highest standards of international protocol. The appointment comes with federal consultant status, security clearance appropriate to the sensitivity of the materials you'll be handling, and compensation commensurate with your expertise level. You would be working directly with embassy staff, foreign dignitaries, and senior government officials on presentations that represent American interests in the international community. Dr. Whitfield stepped forward with her own document. Additionally, the International Luxury Retail Consortium would like to offer you a position on our Standards Review Board.
Your innovative fusion techniques have caught the attention of luxury retailers worldwide, and we need someone with your background to help establish new protocols for emerging markets. David Chen consulted his tablet before adding, "The Federal Trade Commission would also like to discuss consulting opportunities. Your expertise could help us develop better guidelines for truth and advertising compliance in the retail presentation services sector." I felt like Alice falling down the rabbit hole, except instead of landing in Wonderland, I was discovering that the professional world I'd left behind had been looking for me while I was wrapping presents at a mall kiosk. 3 separate federal agencies and an international professional organization were offering me positions that would utilize the expertise that Marcus had dismissed as unnecessary for seasonal retail work. "I don't understand," I said finally. "How did you even know I was working here?" Dr. Whitfield smiled, the first genuinely warm expression I'd seen from her since she'd arrived. Lady Pemberton's report about exceptional presentation quality at an American shopping center triggered several investigations. When she described the techniques you'd used for her diplomatic gifts, we knew we were dealing with someone with significant professional training. A few phone calls to colleagues in Paris and London confirmed your identity and credentials. "Laurent Dubois sends his regards, by the way," she added. "He's been wondering what happened to his most promising student." The mention of Monsieur Dubois hit me like an emotional freight train. I hadn't spoken to my mentor in 3 years, not since personal circumstances had forced me to leave the luxury retail world and take whatever work I could find to support my family. I'd assumed that chapter of my life was permanently closed, that I'd burned bridges by disappearing from professional circles without proper explanations. "Monsieur Dubois recommended you for the European Luxury Retailers Association's Master Craftsperson program 5 years ago," Dr. Whitfield continued. "When you didn't respond to their invitation, they assumed you'd found other opportunities. They're quite interested in reconnecting now that we've located you." Marcus was looking back and forth between the officials like he was watching a tennis match played in a language he didn't understand. His carefully constructed authority over the gift-wrapping operation was dissolving in real time as it became clear that the employee he'd been lecturing about basic procedures was actually being recruited by federal agencies and international organizations. "Miss Foster," Morrison said, "I realize this is probably overwhelming, but we do need a response to the State Department position relatively quickly. The New Year's diplomatic reception season begins in 2 weeks, and we have several high-profile events that require immediate attention. The first assignment would be preparing gifts for the German Chancellor's visit next month," he continued, consulting his notes. "The presentation needs to reflect both American hospitality and respect for German cultural protocols while meeting security requirements for materials that will be transported across international borders." This was the kind of work I dreamed about when I first started studying presentation arts. The opportunity to create presentations that would be photographed by international media, examined by cultural attachés, and used to communicate respect and goodwill between nations. It was the pinnacle of what professional gift presentation could achieve. "There's also the matter of your current employment situation," Dr. Whitfield said, glancing at Marcus with an expression that suggested she was well aware of the management dynamics she'd observed. "Obviously, accepting federal consulting positions would require adjustments to your schedule here." Marcus finally found his voice, though it came out as more of a croak than actual speech. "Miss Foster is a valued member of our seasonal team," he said weakly. "I'm sure we can work out scheduling arrangements that accommodate everyone's needs." The irony of Marcus suddenly declaring me a valued team member after spending a week trying to reduce my work to paint-by-numbers simplicity was so rich I almost laughed out loud. But Dr. Whitfield's response suggested that scheduling conflicts were the least of the concerns that had emerged from this evaluation. Mr. Webb, I think you're misunderstanding the scope of what we're discussing. Ms. Foster's expertise level makes her overqualified for routine retail work. The positions we're offering would utilize her advanced training in ways that benefit both her professional development and the organizations that need her specialized skills. Furthermore, David Chen added, our regulatory review has identified significant compliance issues with Westfield's current advertising claims versus actual service delivery. The FTC will be recommending operational changes that address the quality inconsistencies we've documented today. Marcus's expression suggested he was beginning to understand that this conversation was going to result in fundamental changes to how the gift wrapping operation functioned regardless of his preferences about maintaining simplified procedures. What kind of operational changes? He asked nervously. At minimum, accurate advertising that reflects actual service capabilities. If Westfield wants to continue marketing professional gift presentation services, they need to ensure that all locations can actually deliver professional quality work. That means either upgrading training across all positions or clearly differentiating between basic and professional service levels. Dr. Whitfield nodded in agreement. The International Luxury Retail Consortium has similar concerns about brand integrity in the presentation services sector. When customers pay for professional-level work, they deserve to receive professional-level results, regardless of which employee happens to be working when they arrive. I could see Marcus calculating the implications of these requirements. Training all seasonal employees to professional presentation standards would require significant investment in education and materials. Differentiating service levels would mean acknowledging that some employees were more qualified than others, which could complicate his standardized management approach. However, Morrison interjected, there is an alternative solution that could address everyone's concerns while utilizing available expertise more effectively. He turned to me with a proposal that would reshape everything about how this operation functioned. Miss Foster, would you be interested in serving as the lead consultant for upgrading Westfield's gift presentation services to true professional standards? The position would involve training other employees, establishing quality protocols, and ensuring compliance with federal requirements for advertised services.
The State Department would support this arrangement, he continued, because having a qualified professional overseeing local gift presentation services would provide backup capabilities for diplomatic functions when our primary facilities are unavailable. Dr. Whitfield added, the consortium would also endorse this approach. Having a certified professional managing regional presentation services would help maintain industry standards while providing career development opportunities for other workers. I looked around the gift wrapping station, seeing it with completely different eyes than I had an hour earlier. What had been a temporary, seasonal job was suddenly being transformed into something that could utilize all of my professional training while serving important institutional needs. Instead of hiding my expertise to fit into simplified procedures, I would be using it to elevate the entire operation to international standards. The compensation structure would reflect the professional nature of the position, Morrison said, consulting his documentation. Federal consulting rates plus performance bonuses for successful diplomatic presentations, supplemented by consortium certification fees for training services provided to other employees. The numbers he mentioned were approximately 4 times what I was earning as a seasonal worker, but more importantly, this was work that would challenge and fulfill me professionally, instead of slowly killing my soul with each perfectly mediocre package I was forced to create according to Marcus's instruction sheet. Mr. Webb, Dr. Whitfield said, turning to address Marcus directly, this arrangement would require adjustments to your management approach. Ms. Foster would have authority over all presentation-related decisions, with your role focused on scheduling, inventory, and customer service coordination. Marcus looked like someone who'd just been told that his authority over the gift wrappings operation was being transferred to the employee he'd spent a week trying to suppress. The hierarchy he'd established based on his position as assistant manager was being replaced by a structure based on actual expertise and professional qualifications. I understand the organizational complexity this creates, Dr. Whitfield continued diplomatically, but federal compliance requirements and international standards take precedence over internal management preferences. Ms. Foster's credentials make her the appropriate person to oversee presentation quality, regardless of traditional reporting structures. David Shin was taking notes throughout this conversation, documenting the proposed changes for whatever regulatory follow-up would be required. The FTC would support this arrangement as a solution to the compliance issues we've identified. Having qualified oversight would ensure that advertised services match actual delivery quality. Marcus struggled to process what was happening. So, Ms. Foster would be in charge of the gift wrapping operation. Ms. Foster would be in charge of professional presentation standards, Morrison clarified. You would remain responsible for administrative functions, but all technical decisions about wrapping techniques, training requirements, and quality standards would fall under her expertise. The distinction was important because it preserved Marcus's position while acknowledging that he lacked the qualifications to make decisions about professional presentation work. It was a face-saving compromise that addressed regulatory concerns without completely humiliating someone who'd made honest mistakes based on limited understanding. The transition could begin immediately, Dr. Whitfield said, with formal certifications processed within the week. Ms. Foster's first federal assignment would serve as a demonstration of the upgraded capabilities with media coverage that would showcase Westfield's commitment to true professional excellence. Media coverage. I hadn't considered that diplomatic gift presentations were often photographed for official records and sometimes featured in news coverage of international events. If I succeeded in this role, my work would be visible to luxury retail professionals worldwide, potentially opening doors to opportunities I'd never imagined possible. Ms. Foster, Morrison said, we do need a decision today. The German Chancellor's visit requires immediate preparation, and delaying the appointment process would compromise our ability to meet diplomatic deadlines. I looked at Marcus, who was still processing the complete reversal of everything he believed about the gift-wrapping operation and my place in it. An hour ago, he'd been lecturing me about appropriate skill levels for seasonal retail work. Now he was being told that federal agencies wanted to hire me for international diplomatic presentations while I simultaneously transformed his simple operation into a professional training center. I accept, I said, surprising myself with how quickly the decision came. All of it. The State Department position, the consortium board appointment, the FTC consulting work, and the Westfield leadership role. Dr. Whitfield smiled and began pulling documents from a briefcase. Excellent. We'll need signatures on several agreements, security clearance paperwork for the federal positions, and contact information for expedited background verification. Morrison was already making phone calls to begin the appointment process. I'm scheduling your first briefing for Monday morning at the protocol office. We'll review the German presentation requirements and introduce you to the diplomatic team you'll be supporting. Chin closed his tablet and prepared to leave. The FTC will be conducting follow-up evaluations to ensure compliance improvements are implemented successfully. We're confident this arrangement will resolve the regulatory concerns while establishing Westfield as a model for professional presentation services in retail environments. As the three officials prepared to depart, Dr. Whitfield turned to address Marcus one final time. Mr. Webb, I hope you understand that what happened here today represents an opportunity for significant operational improvements. Ms. Foster's expertise can transform this location into something truly exceptional, but only if management supports rather than restricts her professional capabilities. Marcus nodded numbly, clearly still processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. I'll make sure she has whatever support she needs, he said, his voice carrying none of the confidence he'd displayed when lecturing me about efficiency and appropriate skill levels. After the officials left, Marcus and I stood alone at the gift-wrapping station, surrounded by the evidence of everything that had just changed. The pottery vase I had been working on still sat partially wrapped, but it now represented something completely different than it had an hour earlier. Instead of being an example of excessive perfectionism that slowed down efficient operations, it was proof of the expertise that had just earned me federal consultant status and international recognition. I need to call corporate, Marcus said finally. They're going to want to know about the regulatory requirements and the operational changes. Marcus, I said carefully, I want you to know that I'm not interested in making this situation more difficult for you than it has to be. The officials were right that we need to upgrade quality standards, but I'd rather work with you to implement those changes than create unnecessary conflict." He looked at me with an expression that suggested he was seeing me clearly for the first time since I'd started working at the station. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "I completely misjudged your qualifications and your capabilities. I thought I was managing a routine retail operation, but apparently I was interfering with someone whose expertise I wasn't qualified to evaluate." "You were following corporate guidelines as you understood them," I replied. "The problem wasn't your management approach. It was the disconnect between what Westfield was advertising and what their training programs actually prepared employees to deliver." "Still," Marcus continued, "I should have recognized that your work quality was exceptional instead of trying to force you to conform to simplified procedures. I let my assumptions about seasonal workers override obvious evidence that you had advanced training." Over the next hour, as we began planning the transition to professional presentation standards, Marcus proved that he was capable of learning from mistakes when confronted with undeniable evidence of their consequences. He listened carefully as I explained the technical requirements for true professional presentation work, asked thoughtful questions about training needs for other employees, and demonstrated genuine enthusiasm for transforming the operation into something that could serve diplomatic customers and luxury retail clients. By the end of the day, we had outlined a comprehensive upgrade plan that would maintain efficient service for routine packages while providing professional quality presentation for customers with special requirements. Jennifer and Ashley would receive training in intermediate techniques that would improve their basic skills, while I would handle complex projects that required advanced expertise. The pottery vase that had started this entire sequence of events was finished with techniques that incorporated elements from my upcoming diplomatic training. When the customer returned to collect it, she stared at the presentation for a full minute before asking if we offered wedding gift services, because her daughter's engagement party was next month and she wanted all the gifts to look equally spectacular. I gave her my new business card, which read, "Rebecca Foster, Regional Gift Protocol Consultant, U.S. State Department," with contact information for scheduling professional presentation services through Westfield's upgraded operation. 3 weeks later, the German Chancellor's visit was featured on international news broadcasts, with several shots of the gift presentation ceremony that showcased the elegant packages I'd created according to diplomatic protocol requirements. The coverage mentioned that the gifts reflected American commitment to cultural excellence and attention to detail in international relationships. Monsieur Dubois called me that evening from Paris, having seen the news coverage online. "Rebecca," he said in his familiar accent, "I always knew you would find your way back to doing the work you were meant to do, though I admit I never imagined it would involve diplomacy and federal agencies." "Neither did I replied, looking at my new office space at Westfield, where I was training a team of professional presentation specialists to serve customers throughout the region. But sometimes the most important discoveries happen when we're forced to defend what we value most." The gift wrapping station at Westfield Shopping Center still operates today, serving everyone from last-minute shoppers to embassy staff preparing for state dinners. The sign above the entrance reads, "Professional Presentation Services, Diplomatic Quality for Every Occasion," and underneath, in smaller text, "Rebecca Foster, Master Craftsperson, International Gift Protocol Specialist." But my favorite addition to the station is a small plaque that Marcus suggested we install after everything was finished. It reads simply, "Excellence recognized here daily. Expertise welcomed at all levels. Every package matters." Because sometimes the most important lessons aren't learned by the people who get recognition. They're learned by the people who discover that recognizing excellence in others is more valuable than protecting authority that was never really theirs to begin with. Marcus learned that lesson the hard way, but he learned it completely. And now he teaches it to other managers who are implementing professional presentation programs at retail locations across the country. The ripple effects of that Friday morning confrontation continue to spread, one perfectly wrapped package at a time, carried by customers who understand that they've received something special and want to know where they can get that level of care and attention for future gift-giving occasions. That's the real measure of professional work, not the recognition it receives from officials or experts, but the quiet satisfaction of customers who know they've been served by someone who takes genuine pride in doing things right. And that standard, once established, becomes impossible to compromise. Because excellence, once experienced, creates its own demand for more excellence. Which is why the gift wrapping station at Westfield will never go back to simplified procedures and instruction sheets. The customers won't let us. They've learned the difference between having their packages covered in paper and having their gifts presented with artistry. And they'll never settle for less again. Neither will I. 2 years have passed since that transformative December morning, and I still keep Marcus's original instruction sheet in my desk drawer. Not as a reminder of incompetent management, but as evidence of how dramatically perspectives can shift when hidden expertise finally surfaces in unexpected circumstances. The instruction sheet looks different now, almost quaint in its simplicity. 6 steps, 3 pieces of tape, basic bow placement. It represents a worldview where gift wrapping was just covering purchases in paper, where efficiency mattered more than artistry, where seasonal workers were expected to follow procedures without bringing their own knowledge to the task. That worldview wasn't malicious. Marcus genuinely believed he was optimizing operations and managing resources effectively. He had no framework for recognizing expertise that fell outside his training, no context for understanding that professional presentation work existed as a legitimate field with decades of development behind its techniques. The real revelation wasn't that Marcus had misjudged my capabilities. It was discovering how many other people were working in positions that failed to utilize their actual qualifications simply because their expertise didn't match conventional expectations for their roles. During my first year as regional gift protocol consultant, I encountered a janitor who spoke 6 languages and had worked as a translator before immigration status issues forced him into maintenance work. A cafeteria worker who had managed restaurants in her home country before family circumstances brought her to food service in American schools. A parking attendant who had been an engineer but couldn't get his foreign credentials recognized by American licensing boards. Each of them was doing honest work that supported their families, but none of them were able to use the skills and knowledge they'd spent years developing. They'd learned to hide their overqualification to avoid uncomfortable questions about why they weren't pursuing careers that matched their education levels. I'd been doing the same thing, allowing myself to be diminished to fit into a role that was beneath my capabilities because I needed the income and didn't think alternatives existed. The gift wrapping position was supposed to be temporary, just something to pay bills while I figured out long-term plans. Instead, it became the catalyst for rediscovering professional possibilities I'd assumed were permanently closed. The diplomatic work opened doors I'd forgotten existed. Embassy staff began requesting my services for special occasions beyond official state functions. Cultural attachés recommended my work to international business leaders visiting the region. Luxury hotels started contracting my services for VIP guest presentations during holiday seasons. Within 18 months, I had a waiting list of clients that extended through the following Christmas season. The small gift wrapping station had evolved into a full-service presentation consultancy that employed 12 people and served customers from 3 different federal agencies, plus private clients whose names appeared in society pages. But the most meaningful change wasn't professional success or financial security, though both were gratifying after years of uncertainty. The most important transformation was internal, the recovery of confidence in my own expertise, and the understanding that knowledge retains its value regardless of whether others recognize it. Marcus became one of my strongest advocates as the professional presentation program expanded to other retail locations. He'd learned to identify overlooked expertise among employees and developed systems for utilizing hidden qualifications in ways that benefited both workers and operations. His management philosophy shifted from enforcing conformity to discovering capability. The hardest lesson, he told me during a recent consultation meeting, was realizing that my job as a manager wasn't to make everyone fit the same procedures. It was to create structures that allowed people to contribute their best work, even when that work exceeded my own understanding. His transformation was as significant as mine, perhaps more so, because it required acknowledging fundamental errors in judgment while taking responsibility for their consequences. Not everyone has the humility to learn from being publicly wrong about something they defended with authority. The German chancellor's gift presentation became a template for subsequent diplomatic functions. The techniques I developed for combining American presentation styles with European protocols were adopted by State Department offices nationwide. International media coverage consistently highlighted the artistic quality of American diplomatic gifts, contributing to broader perceptions of cultural sophistication and attention to detail. Lady Pemberton, whose initial recommendation had triggered the entire sequence of events, became a regular client for personal gift presentations as well as diplomatic functions. She often brought colleagues from other embassies who were curious about American presentation capabilities, leading to contracts with diplomatic offices from 7 different countries. But my favorite regular customer remains Mrs. Chen, whose daughter's pottery exhibition had been the project I was working on when everything changed. The ceramic artist's career flourished after that first gallery showing, and her mother continues to commission presentation work for special occasions related to her daughter's artistic achievements. Each package I create for Mrs. Chen connects back to that moment when I decided to prioritize artistry over instruction sheets, when I chose to honor the significance of gifts rather than comply with oversimplified procedures. That decision to maintain professional standards despite management pressure had consequences none of us could have anticipated. The lesson extends far beyond gift wrapping or retail management or even professional development. It's about the courage required to maintain excellence when others are satisfied with adequacy, to resist diminishment when conformity seems easier, to trust that expertise has value even when it's not immediately recognized. Sometimes defending professional standards feels futile, especially when you're outnumbered by people who don't understand why quality matters or who have practical reasons for preferring simplified approaches. But integrity in professional work isn't just about personal satisfaction. It's about maintaining possibilities for the unexpected moments when hidden expertise suddenly becomes visible and valuable. The gift wrapping station still operates at Westfield, now staffed by certified presentation specialists who serve customers ranging from international diplomats to local grandparents. The transformation continues to inspire similar programs at retail locations throughout the region, proving that professional excellence can emerge from the most unlikely circumstances when it's recognized and supported rather than suppressed. Excellence, once unleashed, creates its own momentum and opportunities that extend far beyond original expectations. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.